Arrived. Finally. When you're studying the book of Job, you do the first 3 chapters, and that's where Job loses everything and then talks about how bad his life is. And then you observe the Passover, and you land in chapter 38, and you have what's called the divine discourses, which is a fancy name for God talking. And so most people think the book of Job only comprises about 5 chapters. And because of that, we interpret the first part wrong, and we really interpret the last part wrong. So we're going to spend some time going through here, and you listen to my interpretations, probably come across different than what you've usually heard. And when you hear different stuff, study really close to see if that's really true or not. But I'm going to show my age here. Mid-'80s, early 80s, Andrews, Texas, there was a preacher just starting this new thing. And he had graduated from Texas A&M. He is a veterinarian. And he preached in a place called San Angelo. But he was starting, his name was Bert Thompson, and he was starting this new company, this new ministry, which he called Apologetics Press. Now, a lot of weird things happened to Bert Thompson. And a lot of different things happened to that company. It's located in Alabama now. But I was at one of his first seminars. It was Andrews, Texas, and I remember it. And he went through, and one of the things he talks about, chapter 38 and 39, which is what we're covering today, he said there's 77 questions asked, and now those 77 questions that are asked, today we only have 14 answered. And, you know, with all of our modern science and everything else. And that's always stuck in my head because I thought that was such a neat thing. I've gone back. I'm not sure which 14 we've answered because it doesn't look like we've answered any of them. But he was the one with the PhD, so I guess he knows what we've answered, what we haven't answered. But he was taking it from an apologetics or a Christian defense standpoint. And we today, usually, when we go through this section, follow that same thing. And so when we cover the divine discourses 1 and 2, what we run into is we spend most of our time talking about Behemoth and Leviathan and this long tail and the ridgy back and strong, skin and everything. And we're just really enamored with dinosaurs. And it's got to be a dinosaur. And now in the Bible, we have proof that dinosaurs and people lived at the same time. And it really fascinates us. Okay, look at context. Imagine you're Job hanging out, all right? Job has a good time hanging out. Imagine you're Job hanging out. He didn't have a very good time after chapter 2, but, before, he's happy. You lose your family. You lose your health. You lose your place in society. Your friends are absolutely obnoxious, and you are absolutely hopeless, and everything falls apart, and the Lord appears to you and goes, dinosaurs. All right, is your life better? What would be your response to God? If you went, dinosaurs, you'd be like, that does me no good, right? All right, so what you need to do, and we'll try to do this as we go through, I want you to look at context, all right? And so what we're working with, especially in chapter 38 and a little bit in 39, Job, as he's having a discussion with God starts in chapter 3, God goes to chapter 26, God then goes to chapter 33, and what God is doing is he is following Job's words and giving an answer for everything Job has said. So, yes, maybe a dinosaur is hanging out. We'll talk about that more next week, Lord willing. And yes, there's a lot of questions here. And yes, you can camp here and work with the Romans 1:20, which says, the visible things which we have tell us about the invisible God. And you can look at it from what we call an apologetic or Christian defense standpoint. But if you work with context, Job is telling us something really different going on here. Now, the preacher always preaches too long, so I want to make sure we cover the important stuff. So if you got your notes, flip it over. Let's read the next to last paragraph, okay? And maybe that will be a little bit of the stuff that we have here. because we're going to be looking at a lot of creatures. We're going to be looking at mountain goats. Have any of you been to the areas out west or even in Europe where those mountain goats are on those sheer cliffs and it looks like they're walking straight? You've been there? Okay. Have anybody of us been out west and seen the wild mustangs that you can't really get close to and they bite you and kick you if you get anywhere close? Okay. Has anybody been down to Pickwick or a little bit in LBL and seen some of the eagles in their nest? You know, you'll go like right before spring when the leaves on the trees are gone and you see their nest way up there and they're raising their young. What you're going to notice is God's going to start, especially later in this argument, he's going to start talking about all these animals which you've got to go on a far trip to go see them because they're at the very fringes of everything around. And more or less what God says is, I've got all these fringe animals and I'm feeding them, taking care of them, because there's nowhere that I'm not. Okay? So that's the animals that we're working through. All right, so let's read this next to the last paragraph. All right? Many of the animals God describes in his speech are the ones who lived on the fringes of the world that humans inhabit. Job had referenced many of these animals earlier in the book. We're going to look at chapter 33 where this happens to describe where he found himself after all these problems. Sometimes we see those with problems or on the outer edge of society to be further away from God, the understanding of his nature. We think of the mentally ill, the homeless, or the petty criminals. They're on the fringes of society, right? Kind of like these animals are in desolate wastelands. That's the view Job had taken in his book, that he was on the fringe. Chapter 33, he's going to say, I'm living with the ostriches, okay? But from God's perspective in his first speech, there is no alien outsider. There's no person on the fringe. There are only children of God. Now, it's hard for good Christian people, I've got that in quotes, it's hard for good Christian people to imagine this, but the destitute may know more about the grace of God than do the comfortable. And the petty criminal's life may be touched by the love of God in the ways that respectable Christians cannot imagine. God's life giving rain falls even in the most desolate places. We're going to see that through here. And in fact, those places, those desert places, when they receive rain, the flowers that appear there, the life that appears there for a week or two, it's amazing to see the change that happens, even though nobody is there to see it. So that's what I want us to notice as we go through. We're going to work through our birth passages, but that's what I want us to notice as you think through this chapter, because I tend to get on a tangent and I may not be able to finish, but that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the fringe and how those people that we as good, respectable Christians would not want to be around unless we've read the teachings of Jesus. We have to realize those people sometimes experience God and have a better understanding of grace and a better understanding of God's presence than we do because of what they've gone through. And so if you want to boil down chapter 38 and 39 and what God is telling Job, Job says, for 38 chapters, I'm on the fringe of society. And God responds, I am right there with you, and everything that's on the fringe, I take care of. In other words, Job, you have not escaped my notice. You've not escaped my love. You've not escaped my grace. That's what this speech is about. Okay? Like I said, we tend to, since we've skipped some of the part, or since most people skip that part, we tend to lose context, and so therefore we switch into this Christian apologetic right here as we're going through. Okay? All right. So let's start up. We're in chapter 38, and Elihu has just droned on and on for 6 chapters. Oh my goodness. Job has several times said, I need an audience with God. I am waiting for God to show up. God, I don't deserve what you've done to me, and if there would be a courtroom where there would be a redeemer or a judge, and you'd put God in the docket over here and put me, let me give my argument, God's going to say, oh, Job, you're right. I was wrong. I should not have let that happen to you. Job would say, hey, God, if I could just talk to you, I would explain to you how I did not deserve any of this. And so Job has been begging and begging and begging for this to happen. And now, guess what? Chapter 38, the opportunity has come. God comes. We're not sure about the Hebrew word. It's a whirlwind. You might think hurricane, and this voice is coming out of the eye of the hurricane. You might think a tornado. It's just some cataclysmic wind event. And now God is speaking. So you see his majesty, his presence, and his power. And God shows up. The Mark Ray translation is put your big boy pants on. What the Bible actually says is gird yourself up like a man and let's have a discussion. Okay? You don't get up and you have an argument with the tornado, do you? But that's what the tornado is saying. It's like, okay, Job, here I am. Let's come out. Let's talk. So here we go. And Elihu has said twice in chapter 35, Job, you're speaking without wisdom. And God says the exact same thing. Who darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Prepare yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. All right. Now, the notes are going to explain this more clearly. But when everything goes south for Job, the very first thing he does is he curses the day of his birth. And he says, God, I need you to go back, and I need you to make me stillborn. I need you to erase my birthday. I need you to make it where everybody has forgotten about me. God, it would have been better that I never be created. It would have been better for me to have never lived. God, erase everything out. And so, God, you messed up by making me. And so he is going back to the day of his birth, cursing it, saying, nobody celebrate my birthday ever again. When I'm buried, don't make a gravestone. Nope, I just want to be forgotten. Because this whole life is a failure. This whole life has no purpose or anything else. So God comes to him, and God begins speaking through a birth analogy about the very beginning of creation. And so he's going to be talking about it like a baby's being born, okay? Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Verse 4, tell me if you have understanding. Who decided how big it was going to be? The measurements, who stretched the line? What did we fasten upon? Verse 6, who laid its cornerstone? When all the angels were singing and shouting for joy. In verse 7, okay? As you go through there, you'll notice there's some birth ideas coming through. Who shut the sea with its doors when it burst forth and came from the womb? We made its clouds like a garment and thick darkness like swaddling band. When I fixed the limit for it and set the bars and doors, when I said, this far you may come, but no farther, your proud ways must stop here. As he's going through, what he's talking about is, imagine the doctor is sitting there waiting for that baby to be born. And when that baby is born, he swaddles him and has him there, and everybody says, how cute, even though it's wrinkly and weird looking. I think that's what everybody's like, oh, it's the most beautiful thing I ever saw. And I'm just like, got a raisin, you know. But everybody likes that. And that was my problem with my kids being born. I was born in the wrong era. I needed to be in the waiting room passing out cigars. And everybody's like, oh, you got to be in the birth room. No. But anyway, some people really enjoy that. Well, here is God speaking about creating the world, putting the sea where it should belong, raising the sea in the way it should go, saying, okay, this is as far as you could go, and disciplining it as it grows up. And as he goes through, he's talking about all these things. In other words, as he's going through here, he's saying, okay, Job, I created the world. I created the sea. I created everything here. So Job, tell me, where did I mess up, Job? What did I do wrong in putting the sea where it belongs? What did I do wrong in bringing out the morning? And what did I do wrong with bringing all these things out? And he uses some really colorful language talking about this garment in these next few verses. And he says it's like clay. You know all the different colors of clay? He says it's like sitting here and, especially back in this day, somebody would be out shaking a blanket. If you have a blanket that's outside, you shake it and whatever critters are on it come off. That's kind of gross to think about, but you're shaking it, getting all the dust off. And he says that's what it's like every morning. He says, I'm shaking the blanket, and that's what the sunrise is. You know how all the colors start coming? That's God shaking the blanket and getting rid of all the wickedness of the night before and giving us a brand new day to start with. All that day is past because he's shaking it out. And he goes through, and what he's talking about is this whole birth thing as it comes through. And so, verse 12, have you commanded the morning since the days have begun, and caused the dawn to know its place, that it may take hold of the end of the earth, and the wicked to be shaken out of it? You go through, and he talks about the springs of the sea, and search the depths, and the gates of death, have they been revealed to you? In other words, Job, have you been where I've been? Have you seen what I've seen? Do you understand how all these things are working together, and how all these things are happening? And so as he goes through all those things, he is making the point, or trying to help him know the way all these things have happened together. And so he keeps using these figures of speech about birth or whatever else, and all these things that should go. All right, now skip down to verse 12. And as you go through verse 12, he's using the imagery of creation to speak about the power of justice and how he overcomes the evil and all these things which are going through, and how he's been through the sea, and he creates things for natural disasters. They're in 22 and 23, and you're going to be pretty familiar with that if you read the book of Judges. The book of Judges, Israel very rarely actually had to fight. Usually God would come before them and create a great rain that would trap the chariots, or he'd create a hailstorm and Israel would show up and everybody would already be dead, because God is always winning the battle and everything else to come through, and how all these things would happen. God creates a rainbow and decides where the lightning bolt goes in verse 24, decides where the desert and the lush forest is going to be, and he makes everything through. 31 through 33 aggravates me, because I do not like astrology or the religion that goes with astrology. I used to tell my boys, if you have a girlfriend who starts saying, "What's your sign?" it's this. Say bye-bye, right? Okay? Are you a Scorpio? Are you a, whatever it may be? God says, these people who are looking at astrology and thinking God says, guess who placed Orion's belt where it belongs? Guess who put the belt over here, or whatever it may be? Guess who built all these constellations? Job, you may be looking for answers everywhere. Guess who placed the answers there? God says, I'm the one who put it there, and I am the one who created it, as we go through and everything else. So I like that a lot. Okay, so we've got all that going through, and we're seeing all this stuff. Now, let's go to chapter 39, because I want to spend some time in 39, as I said, as we looked at the very beginning. All right, we're going to look at some animals. And I've always, when I've taught this class, had a lot of fun in this chapter, because we talk about an ostrich, and I love to talk about how dumb the ostrich is. And I always have a pet that's dumb, all right? But he's going through, and he's going to talk about all these animals that are on the fringes, that aren't domesticated, that you can't really control, but they're just out there somewhere. All right, so Job 39:1, you know these mountain goats? When do they bear young? How long is their gestation period? How long are they pregnant? Okay. When do they have their children, and where do they have their children? How do their children grow so strong when it looks like they have nothing to eat? In other words, Job, you look at these goats over here. What do you know about a goat? Other than every once in a while you see them standing somewhere. Well, they got to be having babies, because they're here every generation. And they got to be mating. There's got to be boys and girls or whatever somewhere out there. Job, you don't know any of these things about these goats. But guess what? There they are. All right? Now, what about these wild donkeys? I compared it to our wild Mustangs that we have in this country. These wild donkeys. Who let their donkey go to be the first wild donkey? All right? They live in the wilderness. They hate cities, verse 7. They're not going to listen to you. They search after every green thing, or verse 8. They go everywhere. Who put them there, and who takes care of these donkeys? How do they survive out there if they don't have me telling them what to do? Okay? Now God goes on to the wild ox, and if you read a commentary, there will be a lot. If you read a good commentary, there will be a lot about how chasing these wild oxen was a sport of royals, because they were very difficult to ever get a hold of. And so they would chase them with horses and spears, kind of like the English will hunt foxes, with your dogs. All right, so here's the wild ox. And a wild ox, which we know nothing about today, can you get one to serve you? Can you get one to lay down by your manger? Can you put a plow on him? Would you ever trust him and use his strength? Can you get it to work for you? Could you ever trust this thing? Do you ever trust a wild animal? You better not trust a wild animal. Last week in Yellowstone, once again, somebody got out of their car and tried to pet a buffalo. Guess what happened? They're not going to pet a buffalo anymore, right? They went to the hospital, they survived, but every year, somebody's in a car, they see the buffalo, it's so fluffy. And they get out, and it doesn't go well. All right, wild ox, same way. Now my favorite, verse 13, the ostrich. I remember there was a period of time in West Texas, I think it was all over this country, people decided that ostriches and emus were the path to wealth. Do any of us in here know anybody who became an emu farmer? You know somebody who did?
We bought our third home in Memphis from an emu raiser.
Yes.
He raised emus and they were crazy about it.
Yes.
I was glad they were gone.
Yes. I'd ask people about emus, and they say, "Well, you get oil out of them." I'm like, "I do not see a drain plug." And I'm like, "Do you buy emu oil at Walmart?" And they're like, "Well, no, it's a special thing." And I'm like, "Yeah."
And they said the meat tasted like chicken.
The meat tastes just like chicken. Yes. Yes. KF emu. KFE, right? Yeah. All right. We went through a period of that. But one of the things I liked about it is you could walk up and, there's this ostrich looking at you. And they were pretty fun. If you had any form of jewelry, which I never did, but if you had earrings or whatever, anything that was glittering, they would peck and pull off of you. But they're mean as all get out. But they're just goofy looking, right? Now they're fast. One gait of a wild ostrich back at this time, some of the commentators would say it would be about 15 feet. And they could, for short periods, get up to 50 miles an hour. So they can run you down. But as you go through here, the ostrich doesn't pay attention to where he lays his eggs. And whenever he has young, he tends to trample them. In other words, this animal is dumb. All right? Any of y'all, I'm not going to ask you if you have a dumb pet, because that would be just rude, right? But have you heard of some people who have dumb dogs, dumb cats, whatever it may be? I rescued a border collie from the animal shelter, and it has to be a mixed breed because that's the dumbest dog ever. And everybody's like, "Oh, you got a border collie. It's such a smart dog." Recessive gene here, all right? And so, but there's this ostrich who steps on his own eggs, lays them in the wrong place, just goes around and doesn't make good decisions, and yet generation to generation to generation, they just do so well. They keep reproducing, and you're like, how can something that dumb reproduce? And yet, here they are. God's taking care of them, right? All right, so you go from there, and then you go to the war horse. And here you go from the dumb one to the smart one. This war horse, it doesn't matter what noise is on. It doesn't matter what's being thrown at it. It is always going to do exactly what its master says. It's going to win every single battle. It will always come through and win every single thing. All right, now verse 26. Here's the hawk. It's got an eye that can see everything, right? Here's the eagle, highest place anywhere, and it's able to see. So we're working through all these animals, and all these animals are animals you're not going to see at your house, and you're not going to control. Now, people have raised emus and ostriches, right? Some people will raise a buffalo, which is kind of like a wild ox. Some people raise these things, but they're not pets. All right, what you got, Dan?
Trivia comment.
Yeah.
Many authors from the Civil War attest that the horses loved to go to battle.
Yeah. You could train a horse where it loved going to battle. And Napoleon was really good with his army of training horses that just loved fighting.
They'd be scared of it.
Yep, but they would love it. That's absolutely right. You could train a horse to be that way, and that's what he's talking about. So all these things are wild animals which live on the fringes, and you and I would think, man, that poor ostrich, so dumb. Is God taking care of it? He is. You think about, oh, this wild stallion out there, this wild Mustang, this wild donkey. You know, that's got to be a miserable life. The thing is loving life out there. Now, again, if you go back to chapter 33, Job is talking about how terrible his life is, how he's lost everything. And he goes back and he says, God, my life is so miserable, I'm living with the ostriches. I'm living with the wild stallions. In other words, I have been thrown out of society and I'm on the far edge. And what Job thinks is, and it's what we think, what Job thinks is, if God loves me, and if God is really in my life, everything's going to be great. Does God love me? Well, yeah. Look at my family and look how healthy everybody is. Look how my kids behave in church. Does God love me? Well, yeah. Look at my job and all the money that I make and job security I have. Does God love me? Yeah. Here I am every day on the same pew, every Sunday, and everybody knows that I'm here, and everybody respects what a Christian I am. And we think that if we're in this circle where everything is just right, that means here we are with God, and we are in God's justice. Now, what's happened is Satan has got Job in this circle, and he has thrown him to the outskirts. As Job would say in chapter 33, I've been thrown out to live with that wild ostrich and those wild stallions. And he's thinking, here I am in the wilderness where I don't know what I'm going to eat. I don't know how I'm going to live. I've never been here before. I can't find anything stable. And so in Job's mind, now that he's out here, God doesn't care. If God loved him, he would not have let him be out there. And so now he thinks he's out of the love and the presence of God. But God comes here in this very first speech, and he says, Job, let me tell you something. I see that ostrich every day, and I make sure it has enough to eat. And I see those wild beasts out there, and while they won't talk to people, and they don't have anybody feeding them and petting them and coming up with a special name, that beast is out there, and he is living his best life. He says, hey, I've got this hawk and this eagle out here that you can't catch, and you can barely ever see, and God is taking care of it. So what is God telling Job? Has Job left the love of God and the grace of God? He hasn't, has he? And so this first speech, yes, there's 77 questions, and yes, they're difficult to answer, and yes, sometimes in Christian defense, we'll go through here and we'll talk about the great wisdom of God, and that's true. But really what God is communicating is, Job, wherever your life is, God's there. And God's going to take care of you. Whatever has happened to you, God is there. You have not been ripped away from God's presence. God knows you, and he knows what you're going through. And so we open up in chapter 40 to close up. The Lord answers Job and says, shall the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let he who rebukes God, let him answer. Okay, all right, so Job, I created the world and birthed it. All right, I made this world and birthed it. I'm just like a mother or a father who receives a child and gets to hold him for the very first time. You're saying, hey, I should never have been born. I messed up. God says, I didn't just make you. I made the winds and the waves and the ocean. I made light and dark. I made hell and rain and thunder. Okay, Job, what did I mess up with creation? Do you really think after creating all of that, I messed up with you? Something as simple as you? God says, okay, all these things are happening and I'm taking care of everything on the fringe. You think that if I know about the ostrich that nobody can get close to, if I know everything about this wild Mustang, you don't think that I know what's going on with you? And so God is coming to Job and he's saying, you've got to realize, I see you. You have not escaped my notice. And you're saying that you want to argue with me. I've been right here the whole time. God, Job, you are absolutely not alone. So what does Job say? Verse 3, Job answers the Lord, this is chapter 40, and says, behold, I am vile. What can I answer? I lay my hand over my mouth. Once I have spoken, but I will not answer. Yes, twice, and I will proceed no further. All right, so Job here admits God's right. But Job does not yet repent. And so there's going to be another speech. Lord willing, we'll cover this speech next week. But God's about to go deeper, and he's going to go from the created world to chaos. And chaos is where it's scary. And we're going to start talking about all these creatures that we know a lot less about than the ostrich and the wild beast. We're going to enter into chaos and mythology and all these other things because we've got to prove something to Job. Because, and I got just a few more minutes here, as I've told you before, for me, I want to be in control. A lot of people, for summer, go to Six Flags, places like that, and they get on roller coasters. What is the attraction of a roller coaster? Fear. It's up and down. The thrill. It's the feeling of loss of control. Like, oh man, I've just gone down 60 miles an hour, down 3 stories in 2 seconds, and now I'm going to flip. And, we'll go here and go there or whatever else. A lot of people like the sensation, the feeling of a loss of control. A lot of people like to be in that sort of situation. Not me. I don't want to pay money to lose control. I like to be just right here I am. And I think I told you a few weeks ago, back when I was doing youth ministry, took a ski trip with the kids. I read the signs wrong because I was messing with something, and I ended up on a double black diamond. I don't think that's the worst, but it's the worst I'm ever going on. And about halfway down, after I'd fallen 10 times, I thought, this ain't my job. And I just took off my skis and walked down there because I didn't want to lose control. A famous fella, had just run into a tree skiing and killed himself. And I thought, that's not going to be me. A lot of people love skiing. And some of that's a loss of control. Some of that is the power and the speed and the thrill that's there. I don't like to lose control. Now, what's the problem with life? Are we always in control? Whoa, no. Are we? And you can follow all the rules and do all the things right. There's some people who run 10 miles a day, eat 1,500 calories of only good stuff, and they fall over with a heart attack at the age of 35. And there's some people who just abuse their bodies, and for some reason, here they are healthy at 120 or something, Okay? We control everything because we want to get to a desired outcome, but there's chaos. There is a layer going on somewhere that we can't control, and it just feels so random. And so this next lesson is going to go where not only God knows where we are, but God wrestles with the chaos, and actually God's in charge of it. And so the things we can't understand, God understands it, and he's got it taken care of.